I'm not sure everybody is on the same page anymore. Do you think law enforcement has kind of lost its sense of humor in recent years?
I think we let other people take it away.
Welcome to the Hey Chaplain podcast. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. This podcast is for cops and for everyone interested in law enforcement culture. On Hey Chaplain, you'll hear from dispatchers and federal agents, sheriffs and U.S. Marshals, as well as local detectives and patrolmen from my hometown of Kansas City. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain deliver advice and insights so that police officers everywhere can survive and thrive. A handful of years ago, there was a sweet spot, historically speaking, where police departments could be really funny on social media. It was a more innocent time, before everyone decided that they were offended all the time about everything. One of the leaders in this public display of cop humor was the Bangor, Maine Police Department, where the Facebook page was run by my guest today, Tim Cotton. Tim was a cop for 24 years in Bangor, spending a lot of that time as a detective. His time writing for the Facebook page has led to a second career writing books. So Tim talks to us today about getting started as a writer, what it's like to live in Maine, and how culture today has taken the humor out of law enforcement. Thankfully, Tim's humor and his earnestness are still solidly intact. Here's Tim Cotton. Hello, Tim. How are you today?
Hey, Jared. How are you? I'm fine.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. I'm glad you're here, and I'm just honestly a fan. I really enjoyed The Detective in the Dooryard, read that on a recommendation, and just loved every bit of it. And so I'm glad to talk to you today.
Yeah, glad you called. I appreciate it. It's a nice change of pace to speak to someone been away from the industry for a short time, but
sure.
It's nice to talk to someone like yourself who's done a lot of things. So I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. I wasn't aware of who you were until I read your book, but you've actually had some internet fame. Tell me about the Facebook page for your police department and what you did with that.
Well, the story's been told so many times, but in brief, I took it over because I was promoted from a detective to a sergeant late in life because I'm an older guy, really. I mean, I'm long in tooth, but I was a detective for a long time and very happy at that. But I finally determined that it might be time to get out of that and do something different. So I took the sergeant's exam and I was selected as the sergeant. There were a couple of jobs open. And so I took the PIO, Public Information Officer position at that time. And with that came the Facebook updating and things like that. So that was in 2014. So I took over the page. We had about a 9,000 following, which is fairly strong in that time frame. And for that era in law enforcement Facebook pages, we weren't NYPD, but the large agencies, of course, always have large followings, so it's clear. So I decided to do something a little different and began to write humorous posts and not making fun, basically making fun of ourselves.
Right.
More of having the cops be at the brunt of the joke, which I think a lot of people enjoyed because I think that sometimes we're the brunt of the joke when we're not around anyway. So we might as well face it and take it head on. So I did that, and we became fairly well known quickly because we got picked up by, a strange bedfellow. Really, was National Public Radio picked up some of our stuff, and they liked the writing and they liked the voice, and it just took off. And it was at a time when Facebook could grow. You could grow Facebook, I should say, organically without paying money. We've never paid any money to get any boost. So that's what we did, and it took off and we were at 100,000 in the year after, and 200,000, 300,000, and I think we're steady right now at 331,000 people for a city of 31,000 in Maine. Yeah. In Maine, it's a nice following, and so from that, the writing came. I wrote a lot of stories, but I took my stories away from Facebook after a time because what happened with Facebook or police officers in general is early on they enjoyed being featured.
Right.
The changes over the last few years, the Ferguson effect and the George Floyd incident, all those things kind of changed how police officers wanted to be portrayed. So I lost some of that banter, I should say, writing banter or writing fodder.
Right.
And they don't want to be there anymore. And I don't blame them because there were some people would reach out to them and be negative or find their families on Facebook. So a lot of the things that I the community policing outreach in a way was taken away because of a few upset or angry people at law enforcement in general, because cops don't want to do that anymore. They don't want to put themselves out there anymore.
Well, that was kind of the same ebb and flow with social media itself. I mean, not just law enforcement culture versus culture in general, but 6, 8, 10 years ago, social media was a much nicer place.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And so, if somebody wanted to be humorous online, I felt like that just went further. And something happened in the last 3 or 4 years where people kind of lost their humor. Do you consider yourself kind of the first generation of online cop humorists? Were there somebody doing it before you?
I think Brimfield, Ohio, actually, they had a very large following in Ohio. Okay. But then the chief became, then some dark stories came out from behind the scenes of the agency that the chief was using it for his own good. And there's a bunch of stuff there. I'm not going to get into it, but Brimfield took a big crash. They were they had a huge following for a small Ohio town, 150,000 at that time. So they might've done it first, honestly, but
you were doing it independently.
Yeah, I was never involved in that, obviously, and never really didn't follow it that much. But I know they had a large following because people would tell me, "Hey, you got to read this or read that from Brimfield." Yeah. So I think maybe I've been called that, like I did it first. I don't believe I did it first. I think I just did it a little bit differently by sharing things that might have been maybe more colorful writing. And I think the writing is what kind of carried the day. And of course, we had the Duck of Justice, which you might not know about, but it's just a mascot at the station. Thousands of people every year come to see it. And it had a following because it made no sense, Duck of Justice to people.
Oh, you got it. Yeah. But, tell me about that. It was in your book, but tell me about it.
So basically, when I was a detective, when I first became a cop in the late 80s, there was an old stuffed duck at a DA's office, the district attorney's office in Bangor. And the ladies that worked the office, the administrative folks there, hated this taxidermied duck. And so I always said when I went up there, I was court officer for a time at a smaller department in Bangor. And I was like, if you ever give the duck away, I'd be interested in having it. And they're like, yeah, you can have it. I didn't take it then, but 10, 15 years later, they were moving, and a German girl, I always call her the angry German girl, because she sounded angry, and she was angry. And I'm a friend of hers, so I can call her that. But
right.
And she has this just distinct German accent, and I hate that duck. And she slammed it into a garbage can, and I seized it, and I took it at that point. And I played with it in my cubicle. I was a detective and a polygraph examiner, so I'd have people in my booth or cubicle at work doing interviews, and they'd ask why I had a duck, and I say, you can't lie to the duck. It was a joke. It was just something that, break the mood of whoever was in there.
Right.
Long story short is we slipped it into pictures on the Facebook page without saying anything about it. We did that for a time, and people kept asking, why do you have a duck on your page? And I wouldn't answer them. And over time, I just determined that we'd call it the Duck of Justice because it was a DOJ, and I knew that would also help the search engines. DOJ would help search engines. If someone searched DOJ, they'd get the Duck of Justice in Bangor. So, that was my first attempt at, working the algorithms against Facebook and or Google. And it took off. And we wrote some humorous posts about it, but the duck obviously doesn't write or talk, or it's a stuffed duck. But now it's become an iconic little representation of Bangor, and we have it in a museum in a glass case. And we have people from all over the world come see that every year.
Well, it's a new addition to my bucket list. If I go to
you
Maine,
should come see it.
Make sure I see the Duck of Justice.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You got to have a lobster and see the duck.
Well, this makes me feel as a chaplain, if I saw somebody with the equivalent of the Duck of Justice in their detective's cubicle, I would look at that fondly. I'd be like, oh, yes, good. A sense of humor and some lightheartedness, something to work against all the cynicism. And I would applaud that. But I'm not sure everybody is on the same page anymore. Do you think law enforcement has kind of lost its sense of humor in recent years?
I think we let other people take it away. I don't think we can let... There's naysayers and negative people that are there's people out to destroy anything related to moral conduct or laws, so they just feel like it should be a free for all. I think it's a small group, but they're vocal. They have money, and so I think those folks, whenever they have a chance, they'll find a page like ours or other police department pages, and they'll come in and troll it hard. And we do dumb things. So that's the other thing. Police, we can't blame everything on everyone else. We've done some bad things, and as a general. The problem is, I say this in the speaking engagements, is I don't understand how if you had a doctor in Des Moines and then they took the wrong kidney out in a surgery, that doesn't stop anyone in the world to go see their doctor in Bangor, Maine. Yeah. And so we're not all the same. The one that makes the biggest media splash, all of a sudden there's this turn against law enforcement, a tide, as it were, when cops did horrific things to other people. And it makes me sad a little bit, but I think we've lost our sense of humor and we've maybe gone back into a shell because of it.
Mm. At what point did you think, this could be a second chapter for me?
I never really thought that. I didn't see it as, we all do things, and I think the average human, whether they put it out front and say they're awesome at something, they don't always think they're the best at it. And, you always have self-doubt. So I just wrote, and I wrote the way, there were a lot of people that didn't like my grammar and style. And I got a lot, and that's okay. But I found out that to be true to myself, I felt that was an average, decent writer. But, there's obviously some flaws in everything I do. But what happened was I had some book companies reach out early on and repeatedly call and say, hey, do you want to do a book? Do you want to do a book? Because, of course, they're also climbing on the bandwagon of 330,000 followers.
Right.
And, they're looking. So you've got to take that with a grain of salt. Not everybody, they say they like you, but they don't always like you. And what happened was I just didn't do that until later on. I realized that some of my stories weren't maybe fitting the Bangor PD page anymore. I read a lot of stuff about my own experiences, and you have to, because you have to fill a page. And if the cops don't want to tell you their stories, there needs to be something put on the page. So I realized that I can't do that. I can't run these. So I opened my own website, my own Facebook page, Tim Cotton Writes on Facebook. And I started writing my stories there. And from that, one editor stood out because he came up and did coffee with me. We kind of had like-minded thought process. Yeah. And I decided to write a book or two, and there's three, and we're working on the fourth. So I can't say I ever thought it would happen. No, not at all.
Now, something that I like about your writing is that not only are you humorous and you're obviously going for the things that are funny, but at times you switch gears and you seem to be going for things that are poignant.
Yes.
And I liked the balance of that. That was something that, maybe someone else is just looking for jokes, but I liked that it was funny in one paragraph, and then the next paragraph or the next story was poignant.
I appreciate that.
Is that deliberate? Do you feel like there needs to be a balance, like a 60-40 balance or a 50-50 balance?
No, I can't say as I've ever thought of it scientifically or balanced. I've thought of it as that's how I feel and that's how I write and that's how I speak. So I really do have, I think, cops, their hearts get hardened up pretty well doing this job. However, there is some soft spots and there's some things out there. I know cops that at your car window seem like they look like they are getting ready to invade Poland, but in the end, they're just like you. And I think that I allow that to come out. I grew up in a time when you talked about things, and I don't mind laying it out there, and I don't mind laying out there that cops have a softer side, or have a sentimental side, or a concerned side for society. Because we all know the stories that make Facebook every year on police departments is the cop who buys groceries, right? That goes to a shoplifting complaint and bought the groceries for a family.
Right.
I know for a fact about 40 cops amongst the 90 that I worked with that did that and never were noticed.
Yeah, took the money out of their own pocket. Right.
Absolutely. I put a kid up in a hotel room before. I bought a lot of, not saying me, but me, and also all my compadres. Those stories haven't been told because they don't get told. Cops don't talk about that stuff. Nah, so when that hits national media, everybody's like, oh, that's the kind of cop I want. You know what? You probably met that cop in your own town. You just don't know it. Yeah. I really feel that way because I know that there's a lot of compassion amongst law enforcement. And we go to a shoplifting complaint. We look at the person too. We have a job to do, but we also, I think cops are helpers down deep. And so I always hate I don't hate the story. I'm glad they finally get recognized, but I see the comments and it drives me crazy because I'm like, you probably have an officer in your town or your state or your local sheriff's department that did that yesterday. You just don't know. So I think that's what we're missing is those stories. But now I can't tell them because a lot of people don't want to put themselves out there. And I'd love to tell those stories every day because I know they're happening every day, you know?
Yeah. So are you writing for cops or are you writing for non-cops? Who's your audience in your mind?
Humans. Humans. I don't know. I don't specifically write for cops. Most of my stuff now isn't cop related. It's certainly my friend circle is a lot of police officers,
right?
Retired and current. But I write more for the human race. I write for Mainers. I write for people who want to hear the stories of nostalgia or the feelings that people have. I think I put into words what a lot of people are already thinking. That's all I'm doing. And maybe they don't feel like they have the skills set to do that. But I think when people read my stuff, they think, hey, human, that's a cop or was a cop. And that's what I want. I don't really focus on police officers because they're difficult. They're a difficult band to break into anyway.
Sure.
I think I do get a lot of notes, kind of secret notes from cops. And I did that through the years. Hey, thank you for what you've done for our trade. There are some fellows and women who have said, you made us human, you made us look better. And I just want to tell you, I appreciate that. I have a lot of cops that come visit, want to meet, and I just spoke in Fairfax, Virginia, and I met a major who runs their criminal justice academy, a female, and she came over to the hotel the morning of a speaking engagement to get a book signed. And she said those things. And it was, those kind of things that happen. They're really cool because I like that. I know that there are a lot of people like you and I or in this trade, and they just may not come out and say it much, but when they have an opportunity and they have, a chance to do what they do. So I guess I write for humans, and a lot of them are cops.
Yes. Okay. One of your stories that really struck me, and I can't even tell you for sure why, but you wrote about a chair. And I thought, now why would you write about a chair? I didn't know if this was like, well, there's a writing prompt and I just had to find something in the room, or if you just feel like you have an eye for things that would make a good story.
I think I have an eye for it. That chair, that story is all true. And that was my chair in my office. And I look at it every day. And sooner or later, you start thinking of the stories a chair can tell. And, I know that chair had been, number one, a juror chair, then brought to the station for years in detectives. And it's still there. I wanted that as my going away present. They gave me my pistol. I'd rather have had the chair, honestly. And it's still there. And it's in the next lieutenant, the lieutenant who took over for me, his office. And I guess I write about the mundane, and I relish writing about some simple things that can be thought of differently. And the chair just always kind of struck me as something that, man, that thing has some stories. And that's where it came from. No writing prompts. I've not taken any creative writing. I've not, I don't have an English degree. I just write from what I feel or what I think. And sometimes it just happens to be a chair. And I've written about boots. I have a story about boots. I have a story about,
right.
But I try not to make them the common story about, my leather creak, because I don't like that. I don't enjoy that. I don't enjoy the bravado of this trade. I enjoy the subtleties of this trade. And I guess that's what I focus on.
Yeah. Well, I think about cops who themselves are thinking about their second chapter. And some of them feel like they've got a talent for writing and communicating.
Sure.
I think a lot of cops are fantastic communicators. They learn how to talk to people, how to listen to people. And,
yes.
And they're probably thinking, yeah, but do I have any stories in me? And I'm not sure if they know how to get started.
Sure.
I mean, obviously social media is not what it was 6 or 8 years ago.
No.
How would you tell a cop to get started?
Well, if you look out there now on social, you'll see a lot of the sarcastic pages that have come up, the fake police departments. Yeah. I'm not going to criticize them because they make me laugh too, but I'm a cop. And so things make me laugh that may not make other people laugh. And I've noticed TikTok and dancing, and a lot of people try different skills out there to try to be known on Facebook. I just urge people I guess don't try to be famous. Stay true to yourself and write your story or the stories of those around you. I don't enjoy. I refused for years, and I still would. I mean, I run the Bangor page still just because they had no one else to do it, and I like doing it. I mean, I've done it forever, so it's easy. But I never put dancing videos. I didn't take any of the challenges. I think we sell ourselves short. I think we sell ourselves off as clowns. I don't like that. I don't like it. Now, that's my opinion. Doesn't mean it doesn't work for someone else. I just never liked it. I enjoyed watching those, but I really thought, what does this make people think about our trade? We want to be taken seriously.
You can be funny, but still have dignity.
Some dignity, and not that they don't. There were some great videos, and I know cops in those, and they did such tremendous work. But are we just trying to be famous, or are we trying to, further our profession? So I guess look, if you're writing, you don't necessarily have to write about police stuff either. You could be a good writer, but I would say open a blog and a Facebook page and write. I see a lot more cop writers now. I do, and I think in the spirit of, I only met Joseph Wambaugh through a phone call when I needed a quote for the back of a book, and I've read Joseph Wambaugh. This stuff's rough, but it's true to life, And I talked to him. He's like, do you know how many people have asked me for a quote on a police book? I said, yeah, I get it. I said, listen, you're the guy, though. You are the original. You are the man. I wasn't trying to blow smoke at him. And he ended up doing a quote for, giving me a nice quote for the book. Basically, just, this is a good substitute for the sarcastic diatribes against law enforcement. It was nice. The point being, I guess, is I can tell you how to write, and you don't have to write just about police work. Because we're all humans and we're all doing the same things every day. We're raising our kids. Years ago, I wrote a post on the Facebook page that I took some flack for it. And I wrote that you don't have to say to a police officer, thank you for your service. And I didn't mean it that you can't. I meant it as you could probably talk to a police officer in a different way, like, hey, how are you today? Or how'd your kid do at soccer? Because it's uncomfortable sometimes for cops to hear that thank you for your service. We get paid fairly well in most places in this country. Some places not so much. But the fact of the matter is, I'd rather just talk about your car or what you did today or what you do for work, because I'm as interested in an insurance agent's job as you are interested in my job as a cop. So let the conversation flow. And if it starts with thank you for your service, and that's all you can think of, go ahead. But cops don't feel the need to be thanked. They just, I don't believe they do. It feels good when it happens and when it's real, but don't feel like that has to be the icebreaker with a police officer, because sometimes it's just you just say, hey, how are you? Hey, did you have a great day today? And that conversation will flow nicely. I just hope people can do that.
That's excellent. You wrote that your dad was a pastor, and I really feel like there's an overlap on the Venn diagram between cops and pastors. Have you ever thought about that? And what overlap do you notice between the two jobs?
I think they're both thankless jobs, to be honest. I think that I watched my dad deal with people on a level, on their level as best as he could every day. He'd stand at the back of the service. We'd have people at our house for coffee after church, before church. And, I would go with him, turn the heat on in an old concrete church that we would be at. And the elderly ladies would come in and people would complain about, well, we didn't like that hymn, though, that collection of hymns last week. I think a pastor is taking some of the same negativity that police officers do. They're overseeing a congregation, trying to make things flow. I mean, I know pastors on the level that you probably know pastors as family men, as good people who are trying to do a job and help others. I think there is a connection between law. My dad was a cop when I was born. He was born in 1960 to 1963, Auburn, Maine. He was a cop. And he became a minister later. But I do believe that there are some, you're meeting people where they are. You're listening to stories. You're sharing stories. You're giving them advice. You might not be putting them in jail, but you might be telling them that, what they're doing is the wrong thing. And it's just part of that job. So I do think there's a connection, and I've never considered it. I feel like it's got to be a calling that I'd have to hear from God himself. So it hasn't been there. I think that cops doing good cop work, police work in general, are doing some of the same things a pastor's doing. But I certainly learned a lot from watching my dad deal with people. I have to say that he's a great conversationalist with anyone, and never judged people. Father, really was never a judge of people. He grew up in a tough time, and he knows the game.
Yeah, I feel like cops and pastors they overlap a lot in how they relate to people. That they deal with people's problems. They often have to see the worst of people's problems. If you're interacting with them, usually it's because something's gone wrong. And,
absolutely.
And that's a common thread that both of them feel. It's a burden they both have to carry. And I feel like they're sympathetic, and I also feel like they're doing their best work when they feel that they're fulfilling a calling. I don't really want someone to be a cop if they don't feel called to be a cop. Yeah.
No, you're 100% correct there, Jared. My son became a cop. He knew he wanted to be a cop from. I don't think he ever talked about doing anything else. The only thing he wishes when he went to college for a law enforcement centered program, he says to me now as a cop, I wish I'd taken 2 years of a trade school so I could be better working on my house.
Right.
And in 2 years, because this job, and of course he spent time with me at the station, so. He's a 4-year state trooper, and he just was promoted to detective after 4 years because he's got the skill set of talking. When he talks, I watch him when he talks to people. He picked up a lot of those traits that I have of listening and trying to relate and trying to build rapport. I've said to him hundreds of times. I said, if you go in there and you think you're going to get a confession without becoming their friend and becoming friendly, and you've got to find something you like about every single person, no matter who they are. I hate cops who say, "How do you sit in that room doing the polygraph with a sex offender and not want to reach out and just choke them out?" And I'm like, well, because I want the truth to come out.
Yes.
And that person does have some traits that are good. Yes. And I try to focus on the good. And I don't hate them.
And they'll perceive your animosity. And
they'll
100%.
Shut up. Yeah. And I had a really high confession rate because I didn't mind talking to them about their mother. For 2 hours prior to talking about a crime. You've got to build rapport. And a lot of cops don't get that. They don't get that training. And I don't know why, because I grew up, build rapport with people and they'll listen to you. You don't have anything unless you have rapport. And so my kid has picked that up, and I appreciate that about him. He's done a good job.
Fantastic.
But I wish he wasn't doing the job. I'll be honest. And,
sure.
I really do. I wish he was doing something else, but you can't change their mind when they want to do this. It's what you want to do,
Yeah. Yeah. So your newest book came out this month, right?
Yeah. Actually 2 days ago. Yeah. Dawn in the Dooryard.
Yes. So tell me about that. What is that book? How is it the same? How is it different than your previous works?
Well, it's actually very similar to the first book. I would say it's less police-centric, and a lot of people bought Detective in the Dooryard and expected hardcore cop stories, right? And they didn't
and
get it.
They read about that chair, right?
Yeah, they read about a chair. They read about more the musings of a police officer,
right.
and so I always felt I may have misnamed it, but I like that. I also like the connection to those old those Romero movies of death, zombies in the dooryard, whatever. So dooryard is a common phrase in Maine, and it brings people's attention to it. It's just the area outside the door you use the most. That's the dooryard in Maine. So Dawn in the Dooryard kind of was my second iteration of coming of age and becoming just a writer who spends time in the woods in Maine. And I tell stories about the people I meet and stories about long drives and black coffee and troubled individuals. And because I'm dealing with the same people I dealt with before, just coming to them in a different place. So Dawn in the Dooryard was kind of like the opening or renewal or a new, because Dawn is a renewal. And so I just felt like it was an appropriate name for the book. And it's called Reflections from the Jagged Edge of America. I call Maine the Jagged Edge because we are.
Right.
But it's a lot of stories very similar to the Detective in the Dooryard. There's some police stuff in there, but mostly not. And I'm trying to stay away from it as best I can, to be honest with you.
Sure.
I'm trying to write about the things that I see. And it's a collection of essays. And I write essays. Some are 1 page, some are 5. And I write my thoughts. And people seem to like it enough to buy the book. And I appreciate that. And, my next one's a fiction. It's going to be a little darker than all this. I'm working on that now, so that'll be my 4th book under this contract. So we'll see. After that, they might throw me off the out of the publisher office, but that's okay too. I had a good time, but I like this book. I like this book. It's a fun book, and I think it's an easy read. And I can tell you this: kids can read it. All my stuff, kids could read it. I had one of my biggest fans is like 12. So his parents let him read things that they're not filled with filthy language. I'm not saying I've never sworn. Right. I'm just saying that I just feel like you don't need to always do that in a book to make poignant points. Sure. So good stuff.
Well, let me ask you: what is the best part about living in Maine?
The ability to actually be secluded from others without having the government to tell you to do so. It's very easy for me to not be around people here. And one of the jokes we had at the office during the COVID shutdown was, you know what? The best part of this is I can get to work so easy because no one's on the road. But other than that, my life hasn't changed a bit. I'm in an office. I go home. I spend time alone. I spend time on the coast of Maine in the woods at a lake. I cut my wood. I'm not, So I think Maine's the seclusion of Maine can be tough on some people. They want to be here in the summer, but we have a saying here. It's called if you can't stand the winter, you don't deserve the summer. So, to live through a Maine winter, and I'm sure it can be out that way in Kansas too. It's, but it's a pretty secluded place. So I like the fact that if I want to be around people, I can find them. But if I don't want to be around people, I don't really have to work too hard not to be. I do love that. It's beautiful here. It's beautiful. And the seasons, and it's just a wonderful place. And the people they seem like they're standoffish. They are. But once you get past that, we're like everybody else, very warm and wonderful people.
Wonderful. Well, I just think your first book was fantastic, and I'm eager to read this most recent one. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing.
I appreciate that you thought enough to talk to me today, Jared. It's great to be here.
Thank you. I want to thank Tim for coming in and talking today. His first book was called The Detective in the Dooryard, which is the one that I read last year. His second book was called Got Warrants, and then in November of 2022, he published his third book, Dawn in the Dooryard. If you enjoy humor, alliteration, music references from the 80s, and occasional bursts of earnest and nostalgic Americana, I hope you check these books out, as well as his website. The links will be in the show notes. If you like what you heard here, please share this episode with a cop or someone who loves a cop. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
I always knew that I was going to be doing something in the realm of supporting the people that do the work. Because I had really come to the realization a few years before retiring that, and some of it came from some personal struggles that I had, and struggles that some of the people that I worked alongside with for so many years had been having. And I'm talking about physical, mental, and emotional issues. Yeah. It kind of dawned on me that we do so much to serve our community. And all of us it's such a selfless job, but we do such a bad job at taking care of ourselves.
The views expressed here are the personal views of the hosts and our guests and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. Thank you for listening today. And as always, pray for peace in our city.